Pohnpei, guys, and welcome to another episode of the One Micronesia Podcast. And in this one, very, very special one because we get to reach all the way to Pohnpei, the capital of the Federated States of Micronesia, to speak with Richard Clark, the Special Assistant and Press Secretary to the President of the Federated States of Micronesia, who's taken a time out of his busy schedule on the beautiful island of Pohnpei to speak with us. So, Richard, thank you so much and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. Of course, I believe, as we've mentioned on email, His Excellency David W. Penuello is a huge fan of your podcast, and it's an honor and privilege to represent the government today to answer any questions that your listeners may have, either regarding repatriation, regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, and other topics of interest.
Let's talk about bringing our fellow FSM citizens who are stranded in Guam and elsewhere around the world back home. I know there were attempts to doing it. This was the second time.
Absolutely. Before beginning into the mechanics, and I promise I'll give you as much information about the mechanics of our repatriation efforts as I can, I would like to emphasize that the FSM national government is highly cognizant of the number of citizens who are stranded abroad. And the government has, despite whatever one may think, I can categorically guarantee any individual that it is the opinion of the FSM national government that all citizens and residents of the nation, whether they are within the borders right now or stranded abroad, are highly valuable human beings who we are desperate to have come home, desperate to have return to their families in a healthy and safe manner. That said, mechanically, what have we been doing? So at a very early stage in our preparation efforts, particularly the Pohnpei State Task Force has been very interested in seeing the return of medical patients and attendants who were referred abroad via the MyCare health insurance program. For the months of June through August, what a lot of that preparation would have looked like to the outside is a series of simulation exercises, essentially where the national government, the state government, the United States government, the World Health Organization are collaborating together, simulating what it would look like if people were to come home, testing out our processes, testing out our procedures. And so around the end of August, beginning of September, there were the first very impactful discussions on, are we ready to do this? Are we going to start being able to bring people home? And so in the month of September, the national government had developed a series of relationships with necessary partners in the U.S. territory of Guam. Everything from a pre-quarantine site to a medical provider and so forth. And as we were increasingly coming closer to wanting to move forward, the government became aware of a few procedural and or capacity related issues that were just enough of a worry that it prompted the FSM national government to say, hold on, let's focus on COVID-19 free jurisdictions first. Let's try to repatriate from the Marshall Islands before we repatriate from Guam. So we put the Guam repatriation on hold temporarily to see how we could bring back our citizens from the Marshall Islands. Meanwhile, working diligently to try to address these procedural or capacity related gaps in our domestic health system. As citizens have seen, approximately 24 hours before FSM citizens stranded in the Republic of the Marshall Islands were to come home, there was a case of COVID-19 that had popped in the quarantine site there in Kaselehlie. Once that case popped in Kaselehlie atoll, some of the first questions the government had to answer internally included, how could this, if at all, impact our own repatriation? And it became clear to the FSM national government that there was the possibility, either due to shared resources, including aircraft, that maybe what we want to do here is not as airtight as we're seeking. His Excellency David W. Penwell has used the term an airtight repatriation regime on multiple occasions, and it is very much the President's intention that repatriation activities into the Federated States of Micronesia be absolutely safe by any measurement or standard. And so in internal COVID-19 task force discussions, it became clear that, whatever capacity issue had been here before, we'd still like to go ahead with we'd still like to go ahead with the Marshall Islands, but it's looking increasingly likely that we'll be able to do Guam. We'll be able to have the United States help out if we ask them very nicely. Initially, in our task force meetings, we would have the national government explore, what's the possibility of the U.S. government being able to assist us with repatriation efforts? What's the possibility of there being any available aircraft assets that could assist the Federated States of Micronesia in its repatriation regime? And that increasingly those conversations evolved into His Excellency David W. Penwello formally requesting to the United States government in the form of a diplomatic note. We analyzed the capacity that we had, that we continue to have here in the FSM, and we made the decision to go for it. So that meant that we began putting these 41 individuals into the nation's pre-quarantine site in Guam. And my understanding is that for the next several days, everything seemed to be working as intended. Over the next several days, His Excellency David W. Penwell had become increasingly aware that several members of the Pohnpei State Legislature had some concerns with the repatriation effort. And so President Penwello invited the Pohnpei State Legislature, or at least several of their members, it is inclusive of the Speaker, Vice Speaker, and some other members, to the office of the President, wherein the President Penwello would brief them, essentially, to say, here's every step that we're taking, it's going to work out just fine. In that conversation, it became increasingly clear that several of the members of the Pohnpei State Legislature had medical concerns, capacity concerns, procedural concerns, concerns that were not just based on fear, but based on something that was measurable, something that was tangible. And some of the information that they presented was new information to President Penwello and new information to the office of the President at large.
What sort of information was this? Was this something that?
And some of this information, I promise I'll give you details in just a moment. But it was new to the president. It was new to the office of the president as an organization. It was new to us as staff. And it became something that the president had immediately instructed his medical and technical staff to follow up on. So what some of this information included then is that, for example, Pohnpei State has 10 ventilators. Allegedly, Pohnpei State has not joined ventilator training. I'm not able to say much beyond other than this is what the national government has been informed on. And when President Panuelo learned about it or heard about it on the 27th of November, it was news to him. That of these 10 ventilators Pohnpei State has, allegedly there hadn't been any attendance by Pohnpei State on the training of these ventilators. That allegedly only one individual working still at the Department of Health in Pohnpei State had training on using ventilators.
So what you're saying is the decision was made because one state was not ready, was not fully equipped to go forth with this repatriations, or was this a decision where other states weren't ready as well?
That's a very good question. Let me give you a series of facts, and hopefully that will answer the question. Yes, Pohnpei State Legislature had suggested to President Panuelo that they did not support the repatriation. They did assert that they were going to try to pass a resolution asking the president to cancel. Now that said, every single repatriating person who would have been on that December 5th flight, they all would have been full-time residents of Pohnpei State. Pohnpei State is the only state of the 4 states in the FSM that both the state task force and the national task force were in 100% agreement, we're ready to do this. And so everybody who would have been repatriated, although they represented ethnically and linguistically every state of the residents. Now that said, the president didn't indefinitely postpone the repatriation strictly because the state legislature had voiced their concerns or because of the allegations they had described of medical capacity issues. President Panuelo had instructed staff to follow up on this information. And what that led into is on Monday, November 30th, the president had another about 3.5 hour long meeting with some of the state legislature folks, immediately followed by a briefing with medical and technical staff. Everything on topics ranging from health capacity in Pohnpei State to other items of import as it relates to COVID-19, such as vaccination regime schedules, the status of current funding expenditures and so forth. And so it became clear to President Panuelo over the course of that time period that as he was presented with several different scenarios, the story that the president picked up on was that if somebody were to be repatriated into the FSM, into Pohnpei State, and they have a minor case of COVID-19 pop up, they have COVID-19, but it's just flu-like symptoms, or they otherwise don't need immediate, profound medical attention, we're probably going to be okay. But if there were to be a case of COVID-19 pop up and the individual who had it genuinely needed meaningful medical attention, we don't necessarily actually have the capacity to take care of them. And that might be where it gets worse. And although the statistical likelihood of that happening is realistically pretty small, it's not a significant, substantial threat, mathematically speaking. And certainly the national COVID-19 task force and the state COVID-19 task force were both still very much in agreement that it was medically believed we could probably still move forward with this. But it wasn't the airtight repatriation regime that the president had kept hammering down. And it was because of that the president instructed the task force to address these capacity issues. The president has been very clear that it is his legitimate and very sincere hope that the FSM will remain COVID-19 free, and also that all stranded citizens will be able to come home safely.
My next question is, now we have folks that are stranded. What is the FSM government doing to help them out monetary wise, or for places to live while they're abroad and stranded?
It's a very good question. The most direct mechanical response is that there is a FSM Stranded Citizens Assistance Fund that has been so designated to support citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia who meet the definition of stranded abroad. That fund allows eligible individuals to receive a one-time payment of 1,000 United States dollars for an individual, or 1,500 United States dollars for a family application. Now, this assistance was first announced in May during President Penuelo's State of the Union address. And it's probably fair to assert that the great bulk of stranded citizens have already applied and received this funding. So I'll just let you know now that there is a second for stranded citizens, that the government's second iteration of funding for stranded citizens is not going to require citizens who received the first round to reapply. There won't be any mechanical effort on their end in that respect. If you were a citizen who applied for that first round of assistance funding and you received it, all you'll need to do in your capacity as a stranded citizen is either wait in your designated bank account, or that there said, I'm mentioning this with the addendum that we haven't formally announced it yet. It's my hope that by the time this goes out that we have announced it. And if we haven't, then, hey, we get to have your show announce something new to people.
That is good news, especially for those who are, stranded in Guam or elsewhere in the world, Hawaii and the States, to hear that there's a second reiteration of funds to help them out. My next question is, and I know you said indefinite postponement. So is there a date that we're looking for, or is just whenever we're ready, whenever we're set, we'll go ahead and do it?
At the time of our conversation right now on December 7th, 2020, there is no concrete date for when repatriation efforts will begin again. That said, on December 4th, the chairman of the Congressional Committee on Health and Social Affairs, the Honorable Fernie S. Perlman, he conducted a public hearing wherein members of the FSM COVID-19 Task Force and the Pohnpei State COVID-19 Task Force were in attendance. And Senator Perlman, the Congressional Committee on Health and Social Affairs, for lack of a better term, demanded that the COVID-19 Task Force of the FSM come up with a meaningful, measurable timeline in its next meeting. likely to occur in the next probably 24 to 72 hours. But whether it results in a time frame that the Congress is asking for or not, it's not something I am able to answer at this precise moment in time.
Understood. Understood.
I can tell you this much, though. I can tell you that when President Penuelo relayed his decision to indefinitely postpone this repatriation, he had mentioned it in a meeting with his cabinet. And the president had made it very clear in that discussion that although this December 5th repatriation was postponed, that it is still very much the intention of the national government to bring our stranded citizens home.
Richard, thank you so much. I believe we touched base on a lot of things, and I want to thank you for kind of informing everybody who is on the outside of the FSM and educating them on what's happening, what's really happening in Palikir and all throughout the four states, especially when it comes down to the decision in saving lives and the decision of protecting the nation. So thank you so much for giving us the run through the timeline and the decision and everything that was made to until today, so thank you so much for your time. In closing here, I'll let you, if you have anything you want to throw out before we close out here.
I think what I would assert as a sort of closing statement is that frequently in his speeches and addresses, His Excellency David W. Penuelo, ninth President of the Federated States of Micronesia, will remind citizens and residents and stakeholders that the Federated States of Micronesia extends to all nations and peoples that which we seek from each: peace, friendship, cooperation, and love in our common humanity. Some of the decisions that the FSM national government makes are not easy decisions. Some of the decisions the government makes are not necessarily going to be popular decisions. Depending on one's perspective, they may not always be considered to be the most well-informed decisions or the best decision in retrospect. But every single decision that President Penuelo makes, that Vice President George makes, that any public servant in Palikir representing and working for the government of the Federated States of Micronesia makes, is very much with the intent to share peace, friendship, cooperation, and love in our common humanity to all people, whether they are fellow citizens of the FSM, residents, or other stakeholders.
Okay. All right. Well, Richard, again, I'd like to thank you for, taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you had to find the right spot to get good, service out there. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on the podcast here.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Just to emphasize again, the Office of the President of the Federated States of Micronesia is aware of your podcast, appreciates that it exists, and if you would ever like to have a conversation again in the future about any topic relating to the government of the Federated States of Micronesia, please just ask, and we'll be more than happy to accommodate you.
All right, Richard, thank you so much, and I'll definitely hit you back again for another convo. Until then, guys, that pretty much wraps up another episode of the One Micronesia Podcast. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you guys so much.